It's live. I think it's working.
All right.
I
Hello,
don't
everyone.
know what is being seen, if they can see our beautiful faces or not.
Two beautiful faces and a slide deck.
Perfect.
Nice, perfect. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I think we allowed enough time for people to start trickling in. So we'll go ahead and get started here on this fun webinar about incident response in Star Wars.
Perfect. And we got confirmation as well from Steven that it's working. So good.
All right. You want to kick us off there, Tim?
Sure. So, welcome to our presentation about how the Empire failed at incident response. I know the title is a little different than went out on the invite. It was a last-minute change just to try to make things make a little bit more sense. We felt that this was a little more cohesive and works for our talk a bit more. So we will be talking about incident response plans, how they are very important, but will be a little bit more broad than just that.
All right. So some introductions there are here. Hello, my name is Kyle McCrae. I currently work here at FRSecure as an incident case manager. Current certifications are GCFA, CIHE, and Security Plus. I'm currently studying for the CISSP. I'm currently 3 years in the security field, and all of it has been here at FRSecure. Started off as a vulnerability analyst and have worked my way up. Moved over to the incident response side of things, and then I am also FRSecure's resident Star Wars nerd. So.
And my name is Tim Boyer. I am also currently a incident response case manager here at FRSecure. I have my CIHE. I've been in IT mostly, but IT and security for the last 17 years. I've been with FRSecure for more than 2 years, I think less than 3. Kind of got started actually a bit more security sided, shifted into general IT, and then a couple of years ago came on board with FRSecure as a security analyst, and then a little over a year ago switched over to our incident response team. As it says, make up for my lack of Star Wars knowledge with my killer beard. A little bit of a disclaimer. Definitely still a Star Wars geek, though most of my knowledge and fandom really was pre-midichlorians when I was a little kid. In elementary school especially, it was Star Wars everything, all of the time.
Nice, which I think a lot of people can probably relate to being a fan pre-midichlorian, so.
Probably so. I still like the original movies,
Yep.
but I think because it was a childhood fan thing, I kind of just outgrew it as I got into, junior high, high school, and all that.
Nice. Yeah, but we all know I haven't grown up, so.
Neither have I, so still a fan. It's just my nerd level need to know facts faded off at that point. So kind of just to get started with this conversation, really the first thing we want to just ask and look at and think about is, did the Empire as this big corporation kind of political force, what have you, in the Star Wars universe, did they really even believe in or commit to security as we know it is today anyway? And really, at least what we can see from the movies, they relied a lot more on fear and intimidation than real actual security, protocols. Obviously, they had a lot of physical security, though as we get in, I mean, even that was quite flawed. Obviously, they had the Death Star, big, super scary weapon that they were hoping to use to intimidate people into doing what they want or not doing what they didn't want them to. They had a lot of stormtroopers who really couldn't shoot in a straight line, and they relied on a lot of propaganda and subterfuge. A lot of best practices. Okay, mind you, Star Wars took place a long time ago and far, far away. Maybe they didn't have good best practices at that point, but they certainly didn't follow any of today's best practices. And then really kind of what the reason that this can apply is, I mean, just like how the Empire was constantly under attack by the rebel forces in the movie timeline, companies today and governments are under constant attack by hackers and threat groups. Kind of like some examples we can draw from the movies, constant smaller attacks by rebels, hitting Imperial outposts and such, kind of similar to like phishing attacks. Companies see them weekly, if not more often. And port scanning, they're the little annoyances that may lead to something bigger, but mostly they're just annoyances. And then there's bigger incidents, kind of like the Battle of Yavin, where the Death Star was exploded. You could draw similarities to really larger security incidents, like C2, which is a command and control framework, where attackers get malware into your environment so that they actually can have remote access into your environment to make serious changes and do serious damage. Ransomware events, and of course, data being exfiltrated.
Yeah. And just to kind of go over command and control a little bit more, that's basically like hands-on keyboard. It gives the attacker pretty much anything it wants to. So, and we do see that all the time. One of the most popular ones being like Cobalt Strike, which we deal with a lot. So. All right, so we're going to also, in case a lot of people might not be up to date on their Star Wars or just kind of the timeline we're going to go over. We're not doing any of the sequel movies or really any of the prequel movies. The only one we're going to touch base on is Rogue One. So basically what happened in Rogue One, which we will kind of get a little bit into more detail on why we're comparing this with some incident response things. But HR policies, they hired their lead engineer after they killed his family. Probably not a good idea to do. And then throughout the movie, they found out about how he put in that flaw, and then they went and exfiltrated it off of Scarif, which was the planet that they were hosting their plans on. The next one we're going to talk about is A New Hope. Happens literally minutes after Rogue One. And in that one, we see them trying to escape with the plans. They get caught. They send them down. They eventually get to Obi-Wan. And then on their way to Alderaan, they get tractor beamed into the Death Star, and they get Leia out, and then eventually go back and destroy the Death Star with the plans that were exfiltrated in Rogue One. And then the last movie we're going to talk about is Return of the Jedi. We're kind of skipping over Empire Strikes Back because they really didn't have any defense maneuvers in that one, whereas the incident response, is kind of more blue side. It's not so offensive. But so in Return of the Jedi, they build a second bigger Death Star. It still gets destroyed because they didn't do any lessons learned or go over how all this happened before, and the same thing just happens again. So yeah, again, like we say there, ain't no moon, ain't no battle station anymore, the sequel. So
yeah, they destroy the second fancy machine. So basically from those three movies, really kind of like Kyle was just breaking down kind of what happened in each of them. The key events we're really going to kind of talk about through here to get going. So really starting with in Rogue One, we're seeing really the whole thing leads up to the stealing of the Death Star plans, right? Of course, the project of building the Death Star was codenamed Stardust. They hit it, didn't do it all that well. Ultimately, Stardust got stolen. In that second call, the second event we're going to be looking at is really the loss of the valuable intelligent asset, which was Princess Leia, who they captured at the very beginning of the New Hope, and then managed to lose because they didn't have good security practices even around holding a prisoner. So she gets away. And then the last big thing we're really going to kind of lean into is just their failure to prepare for any kind of attack from the rebels in any real meaningful way, except for having just lots and lots of stormtroopers. They don't do much.
All right, so we kind of also want to kind of go over what they.
We said no prequels, but we gotta get the memes in.
Oh, the meme prequel, yeah. We also had one in the beginning with the hello there. But kind of like, what did they do well? Talk like we talked about, like it's Scarif again. The theft of the Death Star plans. It was in a guarded location. You know, it was on a military base that wasn't well known. There's a firewall in place, which was the planet Shield, and the name of the file was obfuscated or under a code name, which is all great things. It wasn't, well, it was still not like encrypted or anything like that, and easily accessible. At least they did some good things there. Loss of the valuable intelligent asset. We're talking about Leia there. There was a fair practice and a fair attempt to scan the incoming ship. However, it obviously failed. They didn't get to it. And then when Luke came out and they tried to authenticate and identify him, all he did was just knock on his helmet. And then they opened up a secure doorway, and then that whole thing happened. So, and then all the information that was stolen could have been verified prior to the loss. And then preparation for the attack, nothing was really done well. They never really prepared for anything throughout the movies. They were very much in the eradication phase, which we will talk about later in the presentation.
Yeah, so really just kind of add in there on the point about just Luke. All they did was put on stormtrooper outfits and then walk around. Like, that's the least they could do, and it worked.
And then as soon as someone asked who they were, that's when things went.
And they just shot them.
Yeah, but see, and that took forever. They walked through the whole battle station, got to a detention center before even anyone asked who they were. So yeah, which if you want to equate that to like a real life scenario, people entering your office building, like maybe someone could dress up like a cable repairman, see how far they could actually go before someone authenticates who they are. You know, make it best practices. If you see someone you don't see on a regular basis, ask who they are, what they need, you know, what's going on. So,
and hopefully they're not holding a blaster.
Yeah.
So then kind of breaking down, obviously they did a few things kind of well, right? At least they attempted to do physical security stuff a bit. Obviously there was a lot they didn't do well. Starting off with the theft of the Death Star plan. So again, back to Rogue One. One of the big things we see in the movie is the Rogue Squadron, or the infiltrators, the rebel forces, managed to get past their initial planetary shield. They get through the shields, not many, just a couple, because the shield is actually pretty effective. Once they're inside, they don't instantly have access to all the information they need. They do have to get inside the base, and there is some physical security there. What they do actually is they just cause a diversion. They set off some explosions, everyone freaks out, and then they practically run through the front door. I mean, it's a little more than that. But one of the big failures they really took in that first incident is they react really quickly to the initial breach. Big explosions, all their attention went there. The enemy walked in through the back door. So big thing that they didn't do well. They reacted too quickly. We do see this in real life incidents fairly often, I would say. Obviously, when you realize that someone's inside your network, someone's on a system that they don't belong on, that first instinct is always going to be, shut them out, close it down, stop everything. Biggest problem there is you don't know where else they are. In many situations, even in incidents we're working, we recommend to people, yes, you need to shut this down, but you always got to be cautious, right? You got to think out the whole thing. Where else could they be getting in? What else could be exposed? What are they looking for? In the case of Rogue One, right at the very end, as soon as they realize that it's been breached, the Empire just blows up the entire facility. Actually, I think the entire planet. They lose all evidence of what they were even looking for. It seems to me they had a decent idea. They knew that the plans for the Death Star were on that planet, and they were pretty much hoping that they could just blow it all up before those plans got out. They didn't. So obviously, just on that third point, you don't want to miss anything or the true goals of the attackers. I think that the Empire in that situation had a good idea of why they would be going after that planet, the data stores on that planet, and the important information that was there. But by blowing it up, they missed all the evidence. There's probably rebel tactics they could have investigated better to defend themselves in future incidents, since the rebels always kind of go with the diversion tactic. We see it time and time and time again in the movies. And Jim, just that last note, as mentioned, even in real world incidents, pulling the trigger to lock them out, to stop them, it turns your hand. It shows that you know that they're there, and it may cause them to, pull the trigger on whatever their tactics are going to be sooner. It could end up being ransomware. It could be exfiltrating data. Whereas if you move carefully around them, you know that they're there, but don't let them know that you know that they're there, you may be able to, knock out all of their connections, their ways into your network entirely before you, let them know they've been seen. Hopefully being able to actually stop real pain from happening.
Yeah, and to kind of build on that a little bit too, like we're talking about reacting too fast, we see it all the time. People will just turn off affected computers, and you do lose evidence when you do that, like the volatile memory. So don't react too fast. Prepare, get everything together, look for all your IOCs. Try and do that, because if you do cut them off, like Tim was saying, then they could also hastily do their attack and then even cause more damage than they were originally going to do. So, which may be what has happened in the past, where things get ransomed when they're not supposed to, because, code was executed too quickly or anything like that. So it is just always best to breathe a little bit. Don't let them aware that you know, and then move forward, and don't react just too hastily. And then again, but this is the beginning of an incident. This isn't like when you're currently being ransomed. At that point, you do want to probably yank the network cables and stuff, but always leave the computer on.
Yes, make sure you're preserving evidence. Don't go blow it all up. And kind of what you were getting at too. In an incident where there, a more advanced incident where there, could be a command and control framework in place in your environment, you may very quickly find one IP address of the server that this malware is reaching out to. Oftentimes there's 2 or 3, So if you just block one, the first one you find, you may end up telling them that that they're there, and you've really done nothing to actually control their access.
And then they just set up more team servers, and so it's best to find everything, kick them all out at once. So for one, they can't come back later, and 2, they don't change their tactics, and it's easier to find everything.
Yep.
So.
Then just back to stealing the Death Star plans. Two more big failures on the part of the Empire. Obviously, authentication in a secure area. Once the agents got into the base, they basically just dodged guards and got into the data store, and were able to access data without providing any authentication of who they were. It was just kind of like, oh look, Stardust, that's my childhood name. Bing, you found what you needed. Not secure. And then obviously the data, there's no indication that data was actually encrypted. It's kind of like just found the hard drive that said Stardust on it, you were good to go.
Yeah, they could have just BitLockered it or something.
Yeah. But no, that would be too good. And Shazbot. Fail.
All right. So then we will go on to, so that was all about Scarif and everything. Now in Rogue One, we'll move on to their exfiltration of Leia when they got there. So they did scan or attempt to scan the ship afterwards because no one was on board. They looked at the logs and said that all the lifeboats were launched right after they left Tatooine. For one, as we know as incident response, caseworkers, logs could be manipulated or deleted or all that. So they did do the good thing of trying to scan for life forms. However, that obviously didn't work out. They just, took their uniforms and walked outside the ship. And then there was no verification process to identify them as they were walking around. They just had Chewie in fake handcuffs and just walked around. They got anywhere they needed to go. All the information was accessible by any terminal that R2 could plug into. He didn't have to root anything or become a special user. He just plugged in, found what he was looking for, and told everyone where everything was. And then vital components like the tractor beam that Obi-Wan went to go turn off. Think of that as like a server room. You don't want that out in the open. You want that behind locked, closed doors that require a PIN or biometrics to enter. That was just, again, out in the open. He just walked up and turned it off. So
and it had 2 entrances.
Yeah.
You could get in from
true.
2 ways, and it was just a lever. Just, okay, it's off now.
Didn't even need a thumbprint. So it's kind of ridiculous. And then they knew what was taken. So they knew that Leia was taken. They knew everything that she knew. The good thing that they did do is they obviously tracked that, but that's not really security practice. But they could have just stopped this whole thing from happening prior. And then also we have the named pipe called exhaust, which we found kind of funny. So
there was the name pipe, which was named exhaust. Obviously they knew the plans had been stolen. They would know that the rebels would probably be poring over those plans because they weren't encrypted in any way. They probably should have done a vulnerability assessment on those plans to figure out what was going on, but they didn't.
Nope.
So what happened? They were able to come in and steal Princess Leia. And then she was gone. And then kind of that last thing, obviously a lot of focus on the first Death Star here because basically not a whole lot changed come to the second one. What did they not do in preparing for really not just the initial attack on the first Death Star, but even the second one? They just didn't do anything right. Again, as I mentioned, no assessments were really done on the battle stations, first or second Death Star. If they had done a technical review or been allowed to do a technical review of the first Death Star, they would have found out that, hey, we've got a tube that runs from the outside of the Death Star all the way down to the core, and it's just open. Like, serious issue here. And then on the second one, I mean, they're relying on this planetary shield for the Death Star 2.0. So at least there's a shield, but it's off base and rather vulnerable. So big issues. So really, they kind of had a blind assurance of how powerful they thought they were, and that they really couldn't be meaningfully attacked, which is never the case, as we know from this dude in the movie. I forgot to look up his name, but in the movie, he just straight up says, any attack made by the rebels against this station would be a useless gesture, no matter what technical data they've obtained. You're living in a big machine. If they got technical data, you're going to be vulnerable.
Yeah, don't let hubris end your security program. Any security program could continue to evolve and change and grow. So don't think that you've made it the best it could be. So.
And if there's any super nerds out there that know what this guy's name is, you can throw it in the chat. I'll write it down. And ultimately, we know what happened. That happened. And then that happened. But that was later.
And then, yeah, you could kind of think of, say, that open exhaust port being like remote desktop open to the internet with no authentication needed. That would not be a good thing. So, all right. But the next, we're going on to why throwing money at security vulnerabilities is not always the correct option. This is kind of where we're moving on over to Return of the Jedi, seeing as they just built a bigger, better Death Star without the exhaust this time, but still vulnerabilities, because they really just didn't care. They just thought that they could buy and build this thing and they'd be okay. They didn't think about any of the lessons learned from the first couple breaches. They didn't think about any of that. So, and we hear as caseworkers all the time, but can I just buy blank to help secure my environment? Yes, but no. At FRSecure, we are product agnostic. We do work with a lot of great tools, and there are a lot of great tools out there. But if you don't have the best practices already built, like a solid foundation, you don't have the right people or to monitor and use the tools, or just the resources, because we all know that a lot of security and IT people wear many hats. So a lot of these tools require a lot of work to use properly. And if you just buy it and throw it away, it's just a waste of money. Building a solid foundation is the best thing you could do. And cover the basics first. After the first explosion, the Empire built an even bigger space station, like we're talking about it. This time it was surrounded by a shield or their cloud firewall, and it still got destroyed. So instead of doing all that, they just go over the plans, do a risk assessment, and put a $20 gate over the exhaust vent, and that would have solved their problems.
This guy knew.
And he knew.
Yeah. So, I mean, just right along what Kyle was mentioning. I mean, obviously, when we're doing response, we use some really powerful EDR solutions to help us with our investigations. And very often, clients will just see, oh, we were able to get this information. They just want to use that tool, and then they'll be protected, right? And it's just not the case. I mean, doesn't matter how expensive it is. It takes knowledge to use the tool appropriately, and most of the time they don't have that. So just adding that to their suite of, security software is just not going to add any real protection to them for them. This is where we're going to talk a little bit about a plan, when we start talking about the pickerel framework for doing an incident response, going through the activity of an incident response, kind of plan-ish. you want to make sure that when you build an incident response plan, you have a framework to follow. Make sure it's, repeatable and, complete. When we build, not just when we build incident response plans, help build plans for clients, but when we're going through an incident ourselves for a client, we follow, in particular, the pickerel model. It's a secular model. You don't go A, B, C, D all the time. You may well bounce back and forth depending on what's been discovered, but you only ever bounce back. You never skip steps going forward. The 6 phases in that framework are, of course, as you see on the screen: preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. And we'll be going over those briefly here.
Yep. And before we move, I think we could all relate to this meme here, and kind of how just recently our lives have changed. You used to want to sometimes, not treat people the best in person, but then you had to social distance, and then just thinking about it over like a Zoom call or something. So that was.
And just to draw back again, the mention about don't let hubris get in the way. You'll notice the guy choking in the bottom left there is that same guy who had hubris about being invincible because they had a special space station.
Well,
so he got choked.
All right, so we'll start with preparation here, as we were talking about before. That's getting all your people together, your notes, your policies, your procedures, all your tools in order. So when you move forward through the rest of the framework or the rest of the incident during the framework, you don't have to worry about all that. Most of that should already be laid out. As we've said throughout this entire slide, the Empire lacked a lot of the preparation stage. They focus mainly on eradication, blown up planets, killing people, sending Vader after things. That's really all they did. They really didn't prepare very well for anything.
Yeah, so I mean, preparation, hugely important. Every step of the framework is important, but preparation is obviously where you're going to spend most of your time, hopefully. If you're spending most of your time in a phase other than preparation, you're in a world of hurt like the Empire. But say you've prepared, you've got everything set, you've got the right people, the right policies, the right procedures, everything in place. There will eventually be an incident, and that's when you move into identification. When an incident occurs, you need to find out what it is. You need to figure out, what's the scope of it so that you can hopefully respond to it appropriately. So in that identification, you're looking for any indicators of compromise, any malware, evidence of command and control beacons, those being the pieces of usually fileless malware that float around. We're talking out to the team servers, asking for instructions. Compromised accounts, and try to find all the compromised devices. If it's been affected, touched by an attacker, you want to make sure you identify it. Don't just tunnel vision on what is obvious. Kind of like we mentioned with the first attack in Rogue One, where there was the diversion explosions that were big, and then the agent slipped in the back door. Don't just tunnel vision. Try to keep as holistic of a view as possible, especially when you're in the early phases of an incident. Again, I guess I just said it. Empire really lacked on the identification phase. They focused on all the diversions. Main forces just went on with what they needed to do in the background and usually didn't meet that much resistance.
Yep. And all the we could continue, but all the identification phase, like Tim was saying, is highly important. You want to make sure you get every account, because if you miss one, say then your VPN doesn't have MFA, they just come right back in, or all that. So just make sure that is a very important step. Moving on to eradication, which is exactly what the Empire was great at. This is your cleaning, your wiping, your rebuilding of your devices. applying patches or workarounds or mitigations to everything, to all the vulnerabilities that you found in the identification phase. This is where you remove all the artifacts, or at least putting them in a secure location for future training or legal reasons. That does sometimes need to happen. And like we were saying, the Empire was pretty good at this. They blew up Scarif, or the base on Scarif. They blow up Alderaan. They go and kill people when they need. It's just they attack. That's all they pretty much did. So, but it does need to be stated that you have to successfully move through identification and containment phases before successful eradication phase can take place. Like I was just saying, if you don't find every account that was compromised, if you don't find every device that was compromised, that usually just leaves another backdoor in. So if you eradicate 99% of everything, it could not matter in the end if you don't do it properly.
Yeah, and I mean, the way I usually end up thinking about that is if you're trying to just live in eradication, like the Empire did, ultimately it's going to turn into a game of whack-a-mole. Malware's going to pop up on one machine, you delete it. It's just going to pop up on another machine somewhere else, well, delete that. If you don't go through those ever important earlier phases, especially identification, where you're identifying what the attack is, how it's, if malware appears on a machine, how did it get there? Where did it come from? Without, filling in that amount of intelligence in the attack, you're never going to be able to properly respond to it. Kind of like what happened with the Empire. They kept trying to deal with this little rebel attack here, or that little rebel attack there. The rebels were good at hiding. They tried to just eradicate stuff and weren't actually successful in getting to the root cause of, where were the rebels and how could they actually stop them. They tried to in Empire that Strikes Back, but they failed. Once eradication is taken care of, so you've gone through the identification, you've gone through the eradication, you've rebuilt machines. I was going to mention about cleaning up artifacts. Obviously, you want to save important evidence and artifacts. You don't want to just delete them. But when you're going through the recovery, you don't want to leave files sitting on workstations either. So, cleaning everything up is a big part of that. Moving in towards recovery after eradication is really where you're trying to bring everything back to full and normal operation. There really should be a delay in there between eradication and recovery, where you're making sure everything's clean before you declare everything recovered. But it's just that moving from we believe things clean to everything's clean and working again. Obviously, in the case of these movies, with Star Wars Death Star 2.0, which they built stronger, bigger, better, had the same lack of security, a lot of the same failed features as the first one. Obviously, they tried to improve. They added the Endor Cloud Security Services with their planetary shield, but ultimately it was taken down by a bunch of Ewoks or, script kiddies, people that they're not really skilled, but they sure do know how to make a nuisance. And in this case, they took down the only defense that that big incomplete space station had. And as mentioned, I mean, they didn't even have an open exhaust port, but it was destroyed. I mean, really, they were trying to bring the thing online when it wasn't even finished being built.
Yep. Again, rushing everything. Could have just waited till it was completely built and everything before, but.
Just like Chewbacca's Russian in this picture.
Yeah. And put C-3PO's head on backwards the first time. So, last step, lessons learned. This is a vastly important step. This is where you document your incident, you finalize your reports, you update your policies and procedures, you address those policies and procedures. We usually want to leave personnel out of it. Sometimes that's unavoidable, but 100% the first things that should be looked at is policies and procedures. And this is where you learn from what happened. Make your policies and procedure flow better. Make sure that any changes need to be made there to help through the incident if another one occurs. Learn how to defend against certain things. Make sure all the vulnerabilities have been addressed. Make sure all of that is documented and trained upon. And so moving forward, if there is another incident or when there is another incident, everything just goes smoother, basically. And don't do the same mistakes moving forward like the Empire did. So.
Yeah, and a difference I like to draw between really containment or eradication and this final phase. When you're responding to a specific incident, going through the framework, you always want to make sure you're putting in the specific fixes for that attack, right? You don't want that same attack to be able to be repeated. Like, that's going to be an important part of eradication. Everything's stopped. It can't be repeated. When you move into lessons learned, you really got to start asking the questions of what you need to do or change to make sure similar attacks don't happen. Or you may well have identified some vulnerability while responding to the first attack, that wasn't exploited. What have you seen? What can you improve? It's all about improving that security stance so that hopefully after an incident, you're better off than you were before, and not just because you're now protected from this specific incident. Hopefully you take that and improve everything, again, holistically.
Yes.
So again, kind of like lessons learned, worth looking at what the Empire did and asking, what could they really have done better? And really foundationally, starting with company policies and start with HR policies, because if you've got upset people, they're the ones that are probably going to try to do you harm. So in this case, don't kill your potential employees' families and then try to force them to do great work for you, because it's just not going to happen. We see that again. Rogue One, they killed his family. Why are they going to make them an invulnerable space station when he probably kind of wants to see them all dead? And also, don't kill your employees when they mess up. While it may seem effective and more effective than hiring them, just don't do it. It's a bad call. Vader likes to do that, but no.
And then like password policies, and I know kind of it happens a few times throughout the movies. It was an old passphrase for sir, and I was just about to let them through. It checks out. Don't let that happen. Don't let ships go through with old passwords. Make sure those get changed. Make sure they are significant length so they can't get brute forced and stuff. Make sure they follow 3 out of 4 characters, or uppercase, lowercase, special character number, 3 out of those 4. And then we also kind of want to talk about the Kerberos ticket granting ticket, and kind of discuss that a little bit in detail here. Not a lot of people know about it, but when you do find command and control or maybe a piece of malware that might look like Mimikatz, I do know Cobalt Strike has Mimikatz built in. If they're able to get a golden ticket, which if there is command and control framework, is very likely they have done that. It basically allows you to do anything. I like to think about it as, say your environment is like a carnival. You have the Kerberos ticket granting ticket, which gives tickets out to everyone who wants to ride the rides. Say your rides are like your services. And if you get a golden ticket, that person now has a wristband. Just go wherever they want, do whatever they want. Don't longer need to go back to and get tickets and authenticate with that, the ticket that gets granted out. So, but you do have to change that twice if you are going to do that. And it is a 10-hour process. And Microsoft has all that stuff to kind of go through that if you want to learn about it in more detail. But yeah, we just kind of wanted to touch base on that. And that should still happen. And I forget what the recommended Tim is on getting that changed. I think it was once a year or something.
I believe Microsoft now recommends it be changed every 90 days, just like you would normal passwords. So once a quarter, really. Always important to talk about. I think every time we have an incident, whether it relates directly to password abuse or not, I try to mention it just because a lot of people don't touch that account. They'll set up their domain 13 years ago, and that vital account is sitting there with the same password it had 13 years ago. So just real important.
13 years ago is probably password 1 or something.
Right. So super important to make sure that's getting updated and changed. The real tie-in here, of course, is just the way Active Directory treats that account. It holds the current password and the last password. So if you've got a golden ticket attack going on and you go ahead and change that account password once, it's going to be just like the dude that accepted an old password. They can keep using their golden ticket until it gets changed again.
Yeah, and we do know that I think Microsoft and a couple other things do say that not to change your passwords as long as they're at significant length, but that also comes with the caveat that you have MFA as well. And we also would like to say that push notifications, probably not the most secure. Make sure it's like a code or something. Because as our pen testing team could tell you, we've pen tested companies that had MFA, and they just keep trying to go in, and then eventually that person will just push notification and let them in because they're like, oh, maybe I'm just getting disconnected or something, and accepts the login. So.
Oh, you had to mention not resetting passwords. That's a real gripe for me.
Well, we do not agree with that. We do agree with the 45 to 90 days.
Yeah.
Just if you aren't going to do that, and that's something that you want to follow, make sure MFA is behind it, and they are at least 14 characters or more.
Yeah, have MFA, and you had better have really good authentication monitoring practices. Because if you're not resetting those passwords, a compromised password is compromised until you notice. Yeah. And that's the biggest problem I have with it. Like, at least if you're resetting passwords on a schedule, you're limiting the window in which you could be compromised.
Yep.
Continue on with company policies, just around access controls and forms of authentication. As we mentioned with Luke and Han Solo walking around the Death Star in stormtrooper outfits, even if they're not the right height because they're all supposed to be clones or something. They could just do whatever they want pretty much until they started talking to people, and then they had to start shooting. It can happen at almost any place of business. We've got pen testers that will go in to places of business and we'll just walk in. Like 90% of it is looking like you belong and looking like you know what you're doing. So just, think about including additional forms of identification, ID badges, special colors of badges, things that are harder to duplicate. Maybe it's a holographic sticker or something.
And don't post those on the internet either.
And don't take pictures of your fancy ID badges and put them on Facebook. Yeah, no, don't do that. Also, just focus on having defense in depth, multiple layers of authentication. It's not just, well, as soon as you're past the front door, you can walk in and get to the princess. It's fine. Have multiple checks. Yeah, really kind of the same things we mentioned before. Once they're in, they can walk around and do whatever they want. Tractor beam could just be turned off by an old man who was probably a hobo. He just walked up and just kind of threw a pebble and then turned it off. And no real additional authentication to those secure areas. So have ID badges. Hopefully you have a better picture than just a helmet, because that's not very identifiable.
especially in those movies.
Yes.
All right. And then we'll go on to data protection policies. Encrypt your sensitive data while it's at rest and transit. Like we talked about earlier, the Death Star's plans were hidden. They were not encrypted. Princess Leia's holding location within the battle station was not hidden, or like they just found all these sensitive things and were able to take them, and then didn't have to decrypt them or anything. So it's really great. Put BitLocker on your mobile devices. Encrypt your devices so if they ever get lost or broken into or anything, you could be secure knowing that they might not be able to get into that data. Then make sure you have good backups. We say at least a minimum of 90 days, but best up to like a year or however long you could do it. And those need to be validated and tested. Don't just rely on, every week or two I have to restore a file. Make sure there's a schedule, because there might be a couple months where that goes by where that doesn't happen, where you don't have to restore a file. I know it might seem like you have to do it a lot, but it could happen. And then once in those 3 months, something goes wrong and now you're out 90 days of backups. So regularly test them, validate that they work. And then also hopefully there might be a way to make sure that they're not accessible by a domain user account. Just because that's the first thing that we see happen is backups get deleted before you get ransomed. They do find those, they do delete them. So hopefully there is another way that you guys have it available where you could get to those backups and they can't just be deleted, or at least maybe just lose a day, like tapes or something, even though they're not the most reliable. But at least they won't be there to get deleted.
Yeah. I mean, nobody likes tape backups, but they're really secure. Maybe you're backing up your backups to, duplicated hard drives, and you're putting one in a briefcase and taking it with you everywhere you go. They're not overly sophisticated, but they keep a copy offline and available. Like Kyle mentioned, I mean, if your backups are accessible, especially using a domain account or just a file share on your network, they will be found quickly and deleted. They know what they're looking for. I mean, especially attackers relying on ransomware to try to make money these days, they know where to find pretty much every kind of backup if it's accessible. And they'll be destroying it because they know that that's what people do. They just restore it and then say, okay. And then again, just really hitting on that encryption at rest thing. If in Rogue One, all they found was an encrypted hard drive that said Stardust on it, the series would have ended right there, because what are you going to do with it? It's encrypted. That would have been good, but they didn't do that. And the next thing to consider is making sure you're doing security review and audits on any new vendors or solutions. Not even necessarily new. If you've got one in place and you've never gone through like a vendor security assessment on them, go through the practice. Never assume that another company or a new solution is going to be secure, fully secure, and has sound practices. Unless you actually go through the process of, talking about it, maybe interviewing them, getting answers to pertinent questions. Hopefully they're telling you the truth. I mean, ultimately you have to trust the people you're doing business with, but make sure you have the conversation so that you know if there are any kind of potential security concerns. And if there are, it doesn't mean you can't necessarily use that solution or vendor, but you may know that you need to put some other security controls in around them. How do you cut off their access? Is there a backup solution if they go down? Things kind of like that. Obviously, the one we're kind of drawn to here is the planet-based or the moon-based defense system for the second Death Star which we again coined Indoor Cloud Security Services, being a new subsidiary of Empire Inc. It is them, but it's kind of being hosted somewhere else. Saying that, with this new shield, that can never happen because little spaceships can't reach us anymore. Well, unfortunately, it got attacked by a bunch of little Ewoks and taken down. Ever important these days. Within even the last 6 months, I mean, we've been seeing more and more and more supply chain attacks, people attacking components that are in the process of a system, right? And it's too easy to just assume, well, that's a security company, surely their stuff is secure. Nothing can ever be 100% secure. There can be 0 days and backdoors that nobody's aware of. They got in somehow. So making sure just you have those conversations, think about it, and consider what kind of extra security controls you can put up around things you don't control, pieces of software that you don't control. You have to rely on someone else to update it, so that if anything happens, you can lock it down and be as secure as possible. Because there's always the yeet hackers hanging around just waiting to mess stuff up.
All right, and then in conclusion, thank you all for coming, but in conclusion of this, the Empire did fail. We saw it multiple times. Multiple times the same thing happened. But just don't be like the Empire. Care about your security and your employees. Take preventative steps. Try not to be reactive. Try and go through it ahead of time, proactive. Get your policies and stuff in place. Get all the stuff that we talked about in place. Properly properly investigate incidents when they happen, and just learn, become better, get your security program up and running, and continuing to evolve and grow. And then in the end, you win. So
it's not going to be easy. There's probably going to be pain like the Ewoks saw, but hopefully at the end of the day, you can do a little happy dance.
Yes, and I believe this was being recorded and will probably be under the FRSecure YouTube at a later date. I just saw a question being asked, so I do believe that's true.
Yes, we were a little unsupervised in the start of this. It is being recorded. I don't know where, but marketing knows.
I'm sure that will get sent out, or if you subscribe to the FRSecure YouTube channel, you'll get notified. So. Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you everyone for coming. And hopefully this was fun and informative at the same time. We kind of wanted to do a something that people could identify with and try and make policies and procedures and incident response a little bit more fun, because it's not the most fun for everyone, even though we enjoy it. But once again, thank you.
And Stephen did identify the overconfident Empire guy as Admiral Mahdi. I believe that's correct. I think I remember seeing that when I was setting stuff up.
All right. All right. Thanks again, everyone. And look for this out onto the YouTube channel when it comes out. So.